I now have to make a presentation, and I am honored to do that. It's a little different than perhaps some of the things you've heard from me before. God's blessed me. I've got 3 children. Think to myself, what can I leave them? Not to be morbid about it, but what's the greatest gift I can leave them? So I asked my son, who's an attorney and a finance guy. I said, I'm feeling fine, by the way. But, I'm not going to be here forever. What can I leave you? He said, real estate. No. There's that finance training kicking in. So I said, all right, I'm back to the drawing boards. Have you ever noticed sometimes life throws you a curveball, right? And I talked, and you've heard presentations on resilience before. I thought, well, maybe the best thing I can give kids is my children is resilience. Start early, by the way. So I'd like to share some thoughts with you. I think understanding your kids and the younger generations is really important. Would it be safe to say, they're just a little different than we are? But probably we're different than our parents, and that's okay. So I want to share my bona fides with you with the preface that's saying, a lot of this is opinion. I kind of earned my opinion. I've been a university professor for 45 years. I started when I was 5, of course. Taught at the community college, University of Baltimore, University of Maryland, Harvard College, Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins University. I'm currently at the School of Medicine and the School of Public Health at Hopkins. So I've run the gambit in 45 years. And I can tell you, I've been around long enough to see a shift in generations. Some of it's really good. Some, not so much. But it's not their fault. If we point to the younger generations and we say, sometimes they just don't get it. I'm sure our parents said that about us, of course, though. The burden falls on us. But also, we can add to the remedy. And if you attended my first session, it's never too late to rewrite your life script. There are, as they say, generational divides. I am a baby boomer. It was a different time then. We were coming out of the Second World War. Daddy, what did you do in the war? And my father was a son of the Great Depression. And things were different for him, too. He really did walk 3 miles to school and really did study by lantern light. Hard to believe. And when I showed him the film Saving Private Ryan, I said, what do you think? He said, yeah, that's what it was like. I said, Dad, what do you mean that's what it was like? He says, that's what Omaha Beach was like. And I said, Dad, how would you know? And he said, that's where I landed. And in 50 years, he had never told me that. I said, Dad, why didn't you tell me you landed on Omaha Beach? That's kind of a big deal. At least it is to me. He said, I just didn't think it was important. It's kind of like the generations we raise now and the trophies we give them. But that, again, that's on us. So who are we looking at largely? We're looking at millennials. We're looking at some called Generation Z or iGen. And we're talking about the next generation. And I've got 3 grandchildren. So the millennials are different. Deloitte, very famous international consulting firm, spent millions of dollars doing surveys, and they said millennials are changing business. They want businesses to change the world. They value pay, but they value the organizational culture and flexibility, all kind of within the same standard deviation. One of the greatest costs we know to organizations of any kind is when people leave the job. Rough rule of thumb, I'm told by Wall Street, takes about 10 times one's salary to replace a frontline worker, about 40 times the salary to replace a supervisor, and 100 times the salary to replace a CEO. So retention's kind of a big deal. Recently done some work with a very famous IT company who pays their engineers very, very well on the West Coast. Free food, free transportation, basketball courts, bring your pet to work. great place to work, and yet they can only keep their people 2 years, costing them hundreds of millions of dollars in the long run. Millennials' priorities are generating jobs, improving society, and note where profits are. Kind of down the road a little bit. iGen, the information generation, Generation Z, roughly 95, 96. Super connected. Can we spell social media? Remarkably uninformed about history. Not their fault. Exquisitely sensitive to social interactions. Part of that, of course, is the social media idea. Exquisitely sensitive to social interaction may have led to psychological fragility, some would argue, maybe vulnerability, higher risk for anxiety and depression, and suicide, according to some authors. At this point, whether you trust the data or not, self-reports indicate the lowest levels of mental health compared to any other living generational group. What's going on? Reduced tolerance of disparate opinions, and ironically led, some would argue, to censorship on college campuses. Lukanoff and Haidt have said that there seems to be this notion of fragility about this generation, and we seem to be playing into it rather than trying to fix it. I don't know that they're any more fragile, but if we treat them like they're fragile, one of my great mantras is treat people like a victim, they act like it. Treat them like a survivor, they act like it. Treat them like a hero, and sometimes they do heroic things. Is resilience the answer? It's certainly trending. Kind of interesting, though. New York Times published a notion, the profound emptiness of resilience. I don't want to shock and awe with statistics. I just want to take a look at that last column. That column reflects something called the effect size, the power of resiliency training. And the higher the number, the better. Those are not high numbers. Okay, well, there's something to be said for effort. Here's another shock and awe for you. Everybody got this one? There is a quiz. So this is a data set and a research initiative my colleagues and I out of the School of Business have been doing for over 3 decades. We started with a cohort of 250,000 people. We have a rather interesting journey with these people. You'll see right in the middle of the screen is the term resilience. So bad things are on the left of this diagram. The outcome are on the right. So bad things mean critical incidents, but in an organization or just the organizational environment itself. So ambiguity, conflict, having too much to do, not being connected, poor leadership, all of that is on the left side. And what it does is it adversely affects your job satisfaction. It increases your desire to leave the job and just kind of wander around or find a job someplace else. And we actually, this paper actually won a national award because we showed that in auditors, CPAs, those bad things on the left actually predicted dishonesty, cooking the books, shall we say, which is fascinating. And yet, resilience does statistically seem to prevent some of those bad things. I mentioned to you that one possible resolution of why we're having some disappointing results from resiliency training programs is we're not spending enough time to the left of bang. Thank you, Mark Zuckerman. We're not spending enough time on the front end. So when we did factor analyses, we came out with proactive and reactive factors. I'm not going to talk too much about the reactive. You're already experts. What do children need? Don't they need front-end learning? Maybe that's, we give them, there is some debate, but we give them vaccinations against certain illnesses on the front end. We don't wait until they're 20. We do it when they're 2, 3, 4, 5. Some jurisdictions actually mandate that. Thank you. Some jurisdictions actually mandate that for attendance to schools. Do we inoculate psychologically? Do we say, by the way, when you go to school, I can almost guarantee there's going to be a bully there. No, we don't do that. So this is the factor analysis that we did, taking a look at what you do is you take the factors that you think exist in resilience and you submit it to a computer that does endless iterations, shrinking the data until you can't shrink it anymore. If resilience is a unidimensional construct, you should see one factor. You do not. You see two factors. Now, again, not shock and awe with statistics. We're going to get prescriptive here. What is it we should be teaching our children on the front end, if you believe these data have any value? They speak loudly. So a 0.84 is a pretty good thing. Pretty good thing. So what is it that the factor analysis told us we should be teaching children through extrapolation? We should teach them how to be focused on something, how to be task-oriented. Pick a task and show it through to completion before moving on to something else. Does that make sense? How many kids have you seen that just have so many irons in the fire? They start a lot of projects, but they can't finish any of them. So perhaps we should say one thing at a time, which is tough when they have multiple devices, multiple people. The social media is a major source of distraction. This is kind of a cool picture. I couldn't get a transfer, but there's a guy, unfortunately, in an open coffin, and he's getting out of the coffin. He's deceased, but he's getting out of the coffin and said, I forgot my cell phone. You know? Self-efficacy, what does that mean? It's simply agency. We should teach children that they are capable of taking care of themselves, starting to give them tasks that teach them skills of independence, not dependence. Any helicopter parents out there? We should teach them how to handle the curveballs, the angst, the pain. It is part of life, is it not? Perhaps we should say bad things are going to happen, and they can stifle you. They can hinder you. They can also be a building block to make you stronger. Don't we say that when we talk about post-traumatic growth? We say to people who have suffered post-traumatic distress, we say, you know, there's an opportunity. When you get to the fork in the road, take it. That was Yogi Berra. Which road do you go down? This will limit me, or this will make me stronger? After the Thailand cave incident, I got a lot of media requests, did 25, 30 interviews. And the interviewers would say, do you have any concerns, any final thoughts? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, these are remarkable survivors. I am concerned that we will turn them into victims. I wonder if we inadvertently do that in parenting. Our kids go through that. How many times have you seen a little kid hurt themselves and they look to the parent? Should I be upset? And the parent says, oh my God. And they get upset. And what have they learned? And they probably even got a lollipop or something. I'm like, let me see, this kid's smart. So if I freak out, I'm going to get a lollipop. It's kind of like if you've ever watched European soccer. You know, a person gets knocked down, it's like they've broken their leg. They're trying to get a penalty card. They get reinforced for it. Tenacious. You're going to fail. Get back up and try again, because tenacity is a very powerful predictor of resilience. Look at the second factor. After bad things happen, they believe that they can adapt, that they can adjust. They believe they can solve problems. And yes, there's even room for humor. You want to laugh? Take your clothes off and look in the mirror. See, you've already done it. I get it, right? Thank you, Jim Nelves, for sharing that with me. Bounce back, and that's the definition of resilience in the first place. So what are the implications for kids? What should we be doing? I'll be selfish. This is these are the questions I ask myself about my children. What should I be teaching them? Self-efficacy, where does that come from? Challenge and support. Challenge, not just support. And if you want a formula that has survived going on 5 decades, the most powerfully empirically supported evidence-based formula I have seen in all of social psychology and the behavioral sciences, it is the work of Albert Bandura. His magnum opus was written in 1997. Read it. It gives you a formula. Read one of his papers, 4-step formula. How do we build a sense of confidence and agency that I can pick myself up when I fall down? The first thing we do is we challenge kids. We give them things to do. If it's too big, you break it down into small parts. Swiss cheese it. Give them successes with the understanding there will also be failure in there. Let them observe other kids the same age who are successful. And if they can do it, you can do it. That's called vicarious learning. Be there to support them. Be that safety net, the number one predictor of human resilience. Who's got your back? When you fall off the horse, there will be someone there to pick you up. But choose your friends carefully. You ever heard of frenemies? Frenemies are people that are there for you only when you need help. And the last one is, maybe we ought to teach them to control, to some degree, their reactions, their impulsivity, their irritability, their anger. It's okay to be angry, but think about it. What are the implications for showing it to others? How many times have we, out of anger, done something and then immediately regretted it? Just me? How many times have you said something, and as the words are going off your lips, you're saying, oh, this is not going well? Civility. There's a concept for you. Some have argued that things aren't going real well from a civility standpoint. One of the things my father and his generation taught me, because after I talked to my dad, I started interviewing people in nursing homes of his generation, and I wanted to see if there were some factors that I could teach my children. One of the things that jumped out at me was respect. I think people deserve respect until they prove to you they don't. How about that? Rather than the other way around. Teach how to make social connections. Well, remember this guy? Rodney the Rabbit? Yeah. Someone once told me that it's supposed to treat others the way you want to be treated. No! Treat others the way they want to be treated. And if I do so, I'll learn to understand what makes others happy and sad. Not just me, you self-absorbed narcissistic rabbit. So perspective taking. Teach history, please. I have to deal with it when I get your kids and your grandkids in college, and they are clueless. I cannot tell you how many times, and that's not their fault, but I cannot tell you how many times I've given a talk somewhere and someone's come up to me and said, oh, so glad you're here. We've just discovered something. We just learned something. And I said, yeah, that was published 25 years ago. What did Santayana say? Those who fail to read history are doomed to repeat it, right? What does Sun Tzu say about the art of war? Study that which has come before you so that you don't make the same mistakes. What did they say about World War I and World War II? The French generals fought the previous war. The Germans fought the current war. How many days did it take the German army to defeat the French army, even though the French army was larger than the German army, had more tanks and personnel carriers than the German army? Complete military victory was achieved in 5 days. What's wrong with that picture? They were fighting the wrong war. They created the impregnable Maginot Line, and the Germans went around it. Sometimes that's what you do. Well, we can't do this. Well, can you go around it? Mentor. Werner's brilliant longitudinal work out of Hawaii followed every child to be born on the island of Kauai. And a subgroup of those children were targeted, basically identified is a better word, as being at high risk for difficulty developmentally. And she especially followed them. And she found that a subgroup of them did quite well despite their circumstances. And she asked the question, what was it? And you know what it was? It was having a connection to a group of its peers and having a connection to someone who served the role of a mentor, and it did not have to be a parent, by the way. We've seen the power of mentoring in population after population after population. It can be a parent, doesn't have to be a parent. I wrote a piece on how to make yourself unforgettable. How about your children? What will make them unforgettable? Honor and build on the past. It's interesting. In other cultures where I travel, the elderly are held in respect and esteem. Not always the case in this country. What do they know that we don't know? Reliability. Show up when you say you're going to show up. Do what you're going to do. Say you're going to do. Initiative and responsibility. I can't tell you how many times when I say to a student, well, why don't you research this? A litany of reasons why they can't comes out of their mouth. You know, the one that catches my attention is the one that says, that's going to be a challenge. I like that. Where do I spend most of my time, rightly or wrongly? With what student? When my son was going to college, he said, Dad, are there any kind of secrets you can teach? You're a college professor. I said, even at the undergraduate level, find a professor that's doing the work that you like to do and glue yourself to their hips. Show up and say, I want nothing in return other than to learn. You will take their breath away. As an undergraduate, he got to go on archaeologic digs in Italy and Greece, something that very few undergraduates at his college could do. One of the things I told him is politically incorrect as this sounds. If I tell you this, promise you won't tell anybody else. It really does matter whom you know. Whom you know counts. It's not everything. Sometimes they're there to open a door. The door won't stay open very long unless you're competent. But how many times have you seen really competent people who just couldn't get in the door to begin with? So I said to him, when you go to college, you go to wherever, find people, like-minded people whom you admire, and just say, can I study with you? Can I hang out with you? I just want to learn. I don't want anything in return. He goes to law school, he gets his MBA, and he has a really, really good job in the federal government. And his law school did a piece on him in the newsletter, and I said, son, I'm really proud of you. And he looked at me quizzically, and he said, Dad, all I did was follow the formula you taught me 10 years ago. Yeah, there is a formula for it, but you got to take initiative. Because I didn't open those doors for him. His career is different than mine. Responsibility, no excuses. When you screw up, be the first one to point it out is what I told my kids. And when my kids start telling me excuses, I'll let it go for, 10 minutes, 10 seconds, whatever. And they say, okay, fine. Now what are you going to do about it? No excuses. Set up no excuse zones in your home and expand them. Tenacity really does count. Can-do attitude. Information is power. If they won't read, give them books on tape, send them videos. I travel a lot. I've been to 39 countries on 6 continents, many of them many times. I would, remember postcards? I would send postcards to the kids, one to each kid. And the criteria, though, was that you have to take a map, look up where I'm sending you this postcard, from where I'm sending you this postcard, and tell your mother a little bit about the history of that. That was the game. Now I just take cell phone pictures and send them. Now they're sending me the pictures, which is actually kind of cool. Exterocentricity, that's the word for the day. Interest in others. You ever been on an airplane? You sit down next to somebody and you say, I'm pretty sleepy, I should probably sleep. But then you look at this person and you say, they've had a journey I haven't had. I wonder if they're willing to share that journey. And you teach your children that other people deserve respect and are interesting. And you can learn something from everybody else. Does it matter? It actually reshapes the brain. How about we teach our kids how to ride a bicycle, and we know they will never fall over. Well, no, they're going to fall over, aren't they? They're going to how many of you have run behind your kid? Well, I guess I did a little bit. But eventually, you just have to let them ride, and they're going to fall over, and they're going to hurt themselves. But you know eventually they're going to figure this skill out, and they will have it for the rest of their life. So I don't have to worry. When I die, my kids know how to ride bicycles. And that's probably important. But if I use the same principle of learning a skill and overlearning a skill, it becomes second nature to them. And how does that work? Well, that purple area there and that red area beneath it, the job of that purple area is to control the red area, and it usually does a really good job, except in road rage and airline rage and things like that. So that amygdaloid red area is fight or flight and anger, rage, and violent inclinations, and we usually keep those things in check. But maybe we ought to teach how to strengthen that purple area, which controls that. And how do you do that? By repetition. By learning to see the glass as half full, not half empty. So when something bad happens to your kid, can you say, yeah, that's not so good. I wonder if there's any positive that can come out of this. And functional MRIs tell us that the same process that occurs when you learn to ride the bike through overlearning, you do it over and over and over and over again, and you never forget. Guess what? If you start young enough, your kid, regardless of how they were born, becomes a dyed-in-the-wool optimist. They see the glass as half full. And you read the brilliant work of Martin Seligman, Learned Optimism. You can teach it. They end up being happier, healthier, and maybe even living longer. But if they don't live longer, because that's genetic as well, at least the quality of their life. How many times have we wasted our time worrying about something? How many times has your heart been ripped out seeing your kid devastated, crying because of bullying, because they didn't get into the right club, or they didn't get into the right informal network, the in-group, if you will? Does this have an implication? I'll suggest to you that the profile for school shooters are people who were rejected, who were bullied, who had difficulty adjusting. Not all school shooters, but a significant number of them. And maybe we failed them. I'm not in any way forgiving them for what they did, but maybe on the front end, we should teach our kids, and maybe even teach our schools and our societies how to be a little more accepting of people. Here's your last shock and awe picture. It's kind of a cool discovery we made fairly recently. We were looking at how do you learn these core skills, whether they are psychological, cognitive, or otherwise. And it's through a process called overlearning. So back in a previous life when I was a neuroscientist, I was very interested in certain neurotransmitters. and I fell in love with a neurotransmitter called glutamate. We discovered it was a toxic neurotransmitter, probably kills more brain cells in PTSD than does cortisol, for whatever that's worth. But it's also a double-edged sword. It's also a way of searing into your memory anything, whether it's calculus or trauma, anything. The chemistry doesn't know the difference. So we discovered that if you acquire a skill up to the point of acquisition, how many times have you tried something and say, okay, I did it 3 times in a row, now I got it. You come back tomorrow and you can't do it anymore. I wanted to figure out what that was, what the chemistry was, and we discovered that it was something called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. You must do something enough times that the glutamate declines, and this thing called GABA seals it in, and that's what ultimately promotes something called neuroplasticity, and that's the bicycle riding that you never forget. Except now it's mathematics, it's languages, it's civility, it's respect. Malcolm Gladwell hypothesized that it takes 10,000 repetitions to do that. It doesn't. We found that in some skills as little as 29 additional repetitions once you acquired the skill. So what does this mean for your kids when you want to teach them something and they said, Mom, Dad, I got this? Nah, do it 29 more times. They are our future. If the world kind of goes to Hades on their watch, it was really our watch. That's our obligation, teaching them resilience, teaching them to be good citizens of the world. I thank you for your time. Thank you.